Our next talk, I am so thrilled about because I believe strongly in CTI. We need a lot of different backgrounds. Our speaker, Selena Larson, used to be a journalist, and she's now a senior cyber threat analyst at Dragos. And she's going to be talking about how it's so important for any CTI analyst to be strong at writing, right? We all have to write reports. I'd argue this is a core skill, not what some people call a soft skill. We all have to write. And so Selena will be talking about how you can use some of her tips learned from journalism to help you produce reports, write those excellent reports. So Selena, go ahead, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. Can everyone hear and see me? Was that
We can
good?
hear and see you loud and clear with your fancy background too. You're following instructions. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. So hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today. Like everyone has said 100 times already, this is one of my, if not my favorite conference of the year. And it's just a tremendous privilege to be able to speak at it for the first time. So thank you so much for being here. And yeah, so my name is Selena, and I'm going to be talking about writing like a journalist to produce clear, concise threat intelligence reports. So I'm going to is working? Great. So who am I? Like Katie said, I am a senior cyber threat analyst at Dragos. Dragos is an industrial control system cybersecurity company. So basically what my team does on the threat intelligence team is hunt for, identify, and report on threats to critical infrastructure. In a previous life, I was a cybersecurity and technology journalist for 5-6 years, and largely focusing on very technical topics in that space. And so I wanted to show you just a little tiny bit of the work that I did previously and some of the impacts that journalism can have, and how threat intelligence and journalism are kind of intertwined. So I was actually reminded by Rick of this piece that I reported based on Digital Shadows research back when I was at CNN. It was a really interesting research that they did, and I was able to sort of dig into it and report it out. And ultimately, this story was included in a Senate Committee on Foreign Relations report on Russia's cyber operations and the implications for national security. And I wanted to sort of include these items to sort of point out the relationship between journalism and threat intelligence. And hopefully, as we go through this presentation, we can better understand the impact of good writing, what impact that can have on getting people to read and ultimately take action on your reports. Some of you might be familiar with this idea of the conjunction of the spheres. And I wanted to start off my talk today quoting The Witcher, The Witcher 3, which is a video game that I have spent way too much time in quarantine playing over the last year. But it was funny because the other day when I was playing it, this quote popped up. And it's very interesting because it is a great rule that can apply to all types of writing. Scholars have many vices. Possibly the worst among them is a tendency to describe the simple in unnecessarily complex terms, to dress the plain in the garb of false learning. This lesson can be applied to all types of writing, and it's an important component of journalism and hopefully of threat intelligence. You know, making things understood for a lot of people, explaining things to a broad audience is very, very important and crucial part of CTI. Why is journalism important? And how does that impact or relate to threat intelligence? The point of journalism is to record and report on major events impacting societies, our communities, a citizenry. Journalism is important because it holds people in power accountable. You keep people informed, keep them educated. And finally, communicate ideas, information, discoveries, etc., in a way for a lot of people to understand at once. And I really sort of highlighted that last part because it is so crucial and so important. You want to make it so you're writing for a broad audience, taking potentially complicated subjects, taking these very important subjects and packaging them in a way and communicating them in an effective and easy to understand way. A good example of this, I like to kind of point out this subreddit, Explain Like I'm 5. I actually saw Josh answering a question in his Slack chat earlier today about responding ELI5 answer, right? So it's a really great subreddit, but it's also a concept that can help people better communicate their expertise to a wide audience. Essentially what it is people ask questions, very complicated questions, and then the experts who are have this tremendous, amazing, interesting background can answer them in a way that hopefully a 5-year-old can understand. The same concept or a similar concept is taught to us in journalism school. I was told by many, many professors at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism, where I went, that you want to write for an 8th grade reading level. You know, that sort of grade level really changes depending on who you're talking to, who your professor is, and what type of writing we're talking about. But effectively, news writing, which is the best parallels that we can draw between journalism and threat intelligence, is really this sort of 8th grade reading level writing sort of style or audience. Okay, but like, why does that matter? And our boy Geralt is going to come with us as we go on this wonderful, interesting writing adventure. And hopefully it'll help us sort of remember and associate some of these concepts and have them stick in our brain. So why do we want to apply or think about some of the concepts of journalism as applied to threat intelligence? Well, there have been some really, really great presentations across the sort of CNCTI summit history that talk about the value and importance of writing good quality threat intelligence reports. So for instance, Christian Paredes spoke at the CTI summit, I believe it was back in 2017, about generating meaningful intelligence and how it's kind of a challenge, even with the right people and technology. He gave a great presentation about the importance of writing and the value of having a conversation with the reader. And that concept is another one that we think about a lot when it comes to journalism. And I really hope that this presentation sort of builds on that one and all the ones that were before me today as well, which is really great. Taking the perspectives and tools of journalism and applying them to cyber threat intelligence. Because fundamentally, and this sort of answers the why question, is CTI can be for everyone. Good threat intelligence is not just for defenders. It's not just for the SOC operators or whoever is receiving the threat intelligence directly. Companies can operationalize threat intelligence across an organization. This kind of comes into play as well, like Brian was talking about earlier, right? Having the sort of intelligence requirements and identifying stakeholder personas, sort of using threat intelligence to assess risk and make risk management, vulnerability management decisions. Intelligence reports that are written for a broad audience are easier for customers to read, distribute, and act on. So when we're thinking about an interesting example that I like to use, right, is you might be identifying a threat actor that was leveraging LinkedIn for open source intelligence information gathering, as well as spear phishing, finding employees working on certain projects, or finding the different types of software services that are used at an organization based off of either job postings or people's profiles on LinkedIn. That threat intelligence can be operationalized across an organization, delivered to the HR department. So people in HR can decide what type of information they should be sharing on LinkedIn, coming up with potential new policies or restrictions for information sharing for employees, and thinking about how they can better protect themselves from this particular threat. And when we talk about CTI for everyone, that includes journalists. This lovely illustration of our boy Vernon and Geralt having this little high five moment is really indicative of the sort of, the symbiotic relationship, the good positive relationship that journalists and cyber threat intelligence and that type of information really has. Cyber threat intelligence and journalism really do work together. I have a couple examples on here, and there's a ton that I could pull from, but here are a couple. So OSINT collection relies on open source information and reporting. So, Josh actually earlier spoke about some really interesting resources that are open source information and resources for attribution, for example. Open source information can also be media reporting. A lot of times you'll have journalists that have very, very good sourcing in policy, national security, finance, criminal justice, that type of thing. And they can get information from those sources that you're not going to find anywhere else. That can be a very, very useful tool for intelligence collection and open source reporting. Journalists will also rely on and report on threat intelligence and research that are actually conducted by vendors of cyber threat intelligence, as well as internal company reporting and research as well. There's a very interesting talk that I'm very excited for coming up today. Emily and Nina at the New York Times are going to be speaking about how journalism organizations can actually build their own intelligence collection programs, just kind of reinforcing this idea that these two industries are very much related and can learn a lot from each other. So I wanted to kind of walk through some of the concepts that we learn as journalists and apply to journalism and news writing. Again, I want to kind of point out here that there's a lot of different types of journalism. There's magazine writing, for example. There's like sort of in-depth reporting. There's the opinion section, right? Editorial type of writing. But we're really going to talk about news writing when it comes to journalism, because those news writing can have a lot of very similar parallels to threat intelligence reporting. So this is what is called the inverted pyramid of news. It's basically, this sort of very basic structure that all little baby journalists are taught from their high school newspapers all the way through college, right? It's effectively a structure for framing your news writing and how to effectively communicate and get that information across. So we're going to kind of walk through each of these steps and see how it applies from journalism and then applying it to CTI. So from the very top the top of the pyramid is a who, what, where, when, why, how. This is the most important information. It is shared very succinctly. You want to get all of the most important information. Bottom line up front is been referenced a couple of times today, this sort of idea of the bluff. But readers should quickly understand what the story or report is about and why it matters. So we're going to kind of go through a couple examples of some journalism news reporting as well as some CTI reporting in a couple of slides, so we can kind of see how that is structured. But in cyber threat intelligence, when we're talking about the who or the what or the where, etc., that means we're talking about the adversary or the malware or the victim, the potential timing, geography, and why it matters to your customers. That is very, very important, right? Either your customers or the stakeholders or the audience that's going to be receiving this threat intelligence. Why should they care about it? Should they keep reading? And is this something that I'm going to actually find interesting or learn anything from? So at Dragos, like I said, we're an ICS cybersecurity company. And so the why it matters for us is really highlighting, the potential impact to critical infrastructure, the reason why asset owners and operators should care, how their manufacturing facility might be impacted, how their electric utility might be impacted. So you really want to talk to the reader, bring them in, say, this is why it matters to you, and here's why you should keep reading, and then ultimately take action on the information presented. So the next step in this little inverted pyramid of news is this sort of middle part of the supporting information and additional facts. So these would be the additional details that support the essential elements of information. If we're talking about a journalism story, for instance, it might be something like a study done that backs up the claims that are made in the article. Quotes from important people who are related to this subject matter, and the information that they have shared or will be quoted that really support the whole narrative and the news item. When we're talking about CTI, that would be the tactics, techniques, and procedures. The how and the where and the why getting sort of fleshed out a little bit more. Fundamentally, this is information for defenders. In this little piece, you're going to be able to find, sort of identify the actions that can be taken to either prevent an attack, to recover from an attack, information for proactive defense, etc. So it's, again, this sort of like behavioral techniques that you're going to find in the sort of supporting information piece. And then finally, you have this sort of detailed and in-depth information, and that's kind of at the bottom. So, this it seems like it's not as important, right? So it would be information that is not essential to the understanding or the reporting of a topic. As journalists, you often hear the sort of idea of adding color to your reporting. Having these really, interesting, fun, random, like little nuggets of gems that are kind of add color and interesting facts to the story. But fundamentally, you can just chop that part out and it won't change the meaning or a point of a story. So when we're talking about that in cyber threat intelligence, this sort of point of the inverted pyramid really depends on the audience. So if our audience is potentially C-level executives, that the detailed reporting that might be cut off would be the technical malware analysis. That's not going to be useful for an executive level or senior management or risk manager, right, to sort of make a decision based off of the information. They only need what's above it, the sort of, the basics and the additional facts. Attribution, right? We talked about attribution earlier today with Josh's awesome presentation, but that might not be really necessary or move forward the reporting at all. Oftentimes Rob Lee will say attribution doesn't matter, because oftentimes it doesn't. It really depends on, who the audience is, whether or not a defender can take action on it. And if it doesn't matter, just chopping it off doesn't change the meaning of the report. And then finally, there's background information, not really for operational use. It's stuck in there because, again, it adds some insight, potentially some color, some useful information that may be good to know, but is not really related to the actual item that you're going to be reporting on. So this is kind of the process, or the way that you can think about structuring the reporting, and kind of the most important to the sort of least important information. Now I wanted to talk about some concepts that are very, very fundamental to journalism, and how they can be applied to cyber threat intelligence. I'll also have you notice that we have words in parentheses. Journalists like making up words that are slang to them. And there are a couple that hopefully you're going to learn today that I think are very fun. So headlines. Headlines are massively important. It's called the head, and journalists just say head. No way, just HED, head. So what do you do with a headline? You want to provide as much information in as few words as possible. You really want the reader to learn something, and you want to continue to read the report. You can think of report titles in CTI as your sort of headline. This is really going to be what grabs the reader, what sort of inspires them to continue on to read your reporting in general. I got asked recently, how do you find a balance between like clickbait? How do you not be clickbaity? How do you not, sort of drive FUD, right? There's a very, very delicate balance there. And again, I think it has a lot to do with who the audience is. Oftentimes you hear, criticisms of headlines in journalism, cybersecurity reporting that are factually correct, but maybe not how an analyst would really headline the story or the report. But fundamentally, in order for information to reach as broad an audience as it can, sometimes you have those sort of headlines that are sort of missing the nuance. I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying that that's oftentimes what you'll see. And there is an editor's note here that I want to point out. Most journalists don't write their own headlines. Oftentimes you'll have headlines that are written by people who are not cybersecurity experts and are writing it for the general masses who also aren't cybersecurity experts. So just kind of something to think about before the next time you angrily tweet at a journalist for a terrible headline. I was certainly been the recipient of many, many of those. It's just something to kind of think about. So I wanted to use a couple of examples of a news report and then a cyber threat intelligence report. So the news report that I'm using is by my friend Eric Geller. He's at Politico. He's a really wonderful cybersecurity reporter. And this story that he wrote recently was about the SolarWinds attack. So his headline here is how US agencies trust in untested software open the door to hackers. On the right-hand side, you'll see this, or below it, you'll see this other title from Mystic and Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center. They have really wonderful threat intelligence reports that are published to the general public on their blog. And with this one, the threat actor leverages coin miner techniques to stay under the radar. Here's how to spot them. And I really want to point out the similarities in these two headlines. Do you notice the word how? So on the left, you have this Politico story, how US agencies trust in these hackers, or in this software open the door to hackers. You're going to learn, right away from the headline, okay, this is going to be a TikTok of what happened, how the hackers got in, how they were able to stay there for so long undetected. So you know that you're going to go into this and learn something from it. You'll also notice that there is the word how in this Microsoft blog and threat intelligence report as well. So as the reader, that you'll take away from this report, I'm going to understand how I can identify this particular threat actor and that is leveraging this technique to sort of stay under the radar of antivirus or detection mechanisms. All right, so the second one is going to be a lead or lead. Again, no A. So lead is a brief 1 or 2 sentence statement that really opens up the report. It includes all of the important aspects of a story, and it's really going to want to draw the reader in. Again, this should be very, very brief. And it's going to kind of answer or provide readers with the answer on whether or not they want to continue reading. Again, we're going to use these two great examples. One is Politico, one is Microsoft. And I kind of just highlighted the pieces that I thought were kind of that stood out to me the most. And for the top with Politico, we're learning here that the reason why the adversary was able to sort of access the US government and sort of take advantage and exploit the supply chain is because no one was looking in the right place. That kind of provokes the reader to think, okay, so where is the right place? How did they do it, right? So it kind of encourages you to continue reading. The second one, I would say the Microsoft is a little bit long. I probably may have cleaned it up just a little bit. But again, the lead is sort of, okay, what are cryptocurrency miners? What is this threat? And how does it sort of take advantage of these sort of low priority alerts that we're really used to with sort of cyber criminal cryptocurrency operations? All right, and now it comes to the Nutgraf, which is a very fun word. And again, it's something that is very, very unique to journalism. But what is the Nutgraf? So this is the entire point of the story or the report in one paragraph. It really describes what is new, what's important, and why readers should care. This could be thought of or presented as an executive summary if you're kind of thinking of CTI reporting. And I realize that different companies do this a lot differently, and individual companies have different products. The way that you're sort of delivering them is going to really vary. But the broad idea is that you need the important stuff up high. That's the motivation between the executive summary as well as the Nutgraf, right? It really meets readers in the real world, as opposed to sort of sprinkling information throughout or in the conclusion at the very, very end of your reporting, which, to be honest, only a fictitious reader that you don't actually have reads an entire report all the way to the end. So with the Nutgraf, again, using Politico and Microsoft, you can see here that it's very, very like crunchy and full of nutritious information. So you'll see in the political story, how the blind spot was created, how hackers took advantage of it, and effectively what a supply chain attack actually is. I thought this was a really terrific Nutgraf. Journalists tend to do this a lot better than CTI analysts. But you also have here in the sort of meat of the Microsoft report, Bismuth, which is this activity group that they're going to be talking about, how they use open source tooling historically. And then, the important piece is, wait a second, over the summer, the group started to deploy this Monero coin miners in new victimology, sort of outside of the historic sort of TTPs. So again, you're kind of getting the very chewy, nutritious piece of, okay, this is what matters and what's important. All right, and now kind of talking about a conclusion. So this is something that we don't really necessarily have in journalism, but you do want it in CTI. News writing is oftentimes has kickers. This is something that is going to be very memorable. This sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's really compelling or interesting. It just kind of punches you right in the heart. But threat intelligence reporting should have conclusions. You really want to restate important information, calls to action, and why it matters to customers. You really want to have the reader to sort of leave feeling a certain way and potentially take certain actions. It's really the so what of your entire report. You really just want to make it super memorable to a reader. But one thing that is very important is you want to make sure that the conclusion is not the only place where information is simplified and summarized. This is actually something that I see pretty frequently with cyber threat intelligence reporting, is that throughout the report, it'll be really, really great, but there's no sort of easy to read, TLDR, explain like I'm five, why does it matter piece until the very, very end of the report. And that can be an issue because people generally aren't going to scroll all the way to the bottom of the report. They want to understand right away why this matters. Should I read it? Does it apply to me? And should I take action on it? So while a conclusion is very important to have, restating the most impactful things, really having an impact on the reader, you really want to make sure that it's not the only place where that information is simplified, broken down, easy to read, and summarized. So another very important facet of journalism are editors. And here is Geralt coming to chop up your copy and leave you feeling sad. Journalists have a really love-hate relationship with their editors. And I say this as someone who has had really amazing editors in my life. I have wanted to just scream. But fundamentally, they exist to improve your writing and ensure that readers or customers or stakeholders, your audience, can understand and act on it. Editors are so important and are a very, very important and valuable piece of the entire threat intelligence process, the writing process to communicate your findings, your threat intelligence, and the so what factor. Um, One of my favorite quotes about writing is this idea of murder your darlings. It's Sir Arthur Quiller Crouch, who was an English writer, author, poet in the early 1900s, said this quote about murder your darlings, how to sort of edit yourself. And you really want to edit objectively. You don't want to have feeling or personal attachment to your words. We do that a lot, I think. As writers, our words and what we write are kind of an extension of ourself. And it can be a very personal process to be edited, to see everything sort of chopped up and disregarded and like red lines everywhere. And it feels kind of personal. But, one of the defining characteristics of good professional writers is becoming comfortable with serious, aggressive editing, like machete style editing or like Geralt with the sword, just coming through and chopping it up. And this idea of murdering your darlings, if you can kind of do it yourself, if you can become comfortable, objectively editing your own work and not sort of having this personal attachment to your words and writing, you're going to become a much better writer. Deadlines, another very important concept for journalism and journalists. Journalists live and die by deadlines. They're very, very important, right? You want to be accurate, but you also want to be first. You want to get information out there. A lot of times we sort of talk about the CART model, threat intelligence, right? Like complete, accurate, relevant, timely. The deadlines piece really falls into that sort of timeliness aspect. Being able to produce really efficient copy in a way that sort of meets those timeliness standards is super, super important. And implementing deadlines for threat intelligence reporting is also extremely valuable. There are multiple reasons for this. It helps you know when you need to inform customers. It helps you adhere to a threat intelligence reporting cycle. Now, having deadlines is not to say that you ever stop hunting and finding new and important information. That is, you want to sort of collect, analyze, and publish. Once you get enough information that can support the intelligence requirements of your audience, you really want to make sure that you're actually getting it out there and publishing. I think one of the things that we think about and oftentimes kind of fall into this trap is that, we're writing for, we think we're writing for people like us. We want to have everything perfect, everything packaged into this wonderful bow. We want to make sure that every question that an analyst might have about our work, our reporting, or an indicator or a threat behavior is answered without having to come to us and ask. But we're not just writing for other analysts. In fact, most of the time, we're not writing for other analysts. We're writing for our stakeholders. We're writing for people who are making decisions. We're writing for people who are, dealing with patch management. Business decisions, right? Security operators. It's not just analysts that are also experts in this field. And it's very useful to kind of think about that as you're going through the report and say, think about the audience and think about how you're writing and presenting and publishing information. And finally, passive voice. So passive voice is something I think that is a very, very easy way to immediately clean up your writing is to just eliminate all passive voice. This is a very easy sort of trap to fall into, is the trap of passive voice. This is something that can be identified by sort of like helping verbs, right? Like am, is, was, were, are, been. And effectively, passive voice sort of removes urgency. For a great example is the company was targeted by APT29. To fix that, you kind of want to swap it. So APT29 targeted the company. It's really difficult to kind of explain it in one slide. But over the course of an entire report or a story, passive voice makes it more difficult to read and to process and to think about how to take action on something. The main idea that you want is to have quote unquote active writing. So APT 29 target of the company is an example of having a very active sentence, as opposed to this idea of like passive voice or passive writing. And this kind of applies to passive voice because it does kind of throw in some like wrenches and sort of slows down your reporting or the sort of narrative or storytelling. But also big words do the same thing. Readers should not need to look at a dictionary or thesaurus while they're reading your report. There are times when you need to use words that are not common in a traditional lexicon. And if that occurs, then you should define them as part of the sentence. More often than not, though, you could just use a much, much simpler word. This kind of takes us back to what we learned about in The Witcher, far, far away earlier in this presentation, about how scholars tend to explain in very, very big words, which could be summarized very simple. And this is kind of a takeaway on that, right? You don't want your readers looking at a dictionary or right-clicking define as they're reading through your reporting. So what can you do to clean up your writing? Well, number one, be concise. This is actually a lesson that we've learned from multiple different talks today. So I'm glad it's kind of, coming through as a thread in my talk and kind of connecting all the rest of them. But be concise. Keep sentences short and simple. The shorter and more simple the pieces that you're compiling, the easier it is going to be to understand as a reader. Put the most important information first. If you kind of think back to the sort of reverse pyramid of news writing, that who, what, where, when, why, that should really be up at the front. And you also want to make sure that, again, the sort of TLDR, the important media information is not just in the conclusion. You want to make sure that that is up front. Consider your audience. I think, both the talks before mine had a great ideas and sort of examples of intelligence requirements, considering your audience, who are you writing for? But make sure that you are not just writing for other analysts. If you are, have other intelligence requirements, either for your customers or other stakeholders within the organization. And then finally, remove passive voice, just cut it out entirely. It's the easiest, I would say, probably the most simple thing that you can do to clean up your writing and make it a lot cleaner, more active and engaging. So where to start? There are tons of resources available for writing, and the Elements of Style is basically the handbook that everybody has to read if you've ever studied any sort of writing, fiction writing, all the way to academic writing. It's very, very useful. So I highly recommend that. Available at your local bookstore. Pointer is a great resource for journalism, news, and information, as well as just writing tips and tricks. This specific blog, These Tips Will Make You a Better Writer, has a ton of links to various sources. Like the writing process is a screenshot that I put here, like how to polish your writing, how to find a theme. It's very, very useful, and I highly recommend checking that out. And then finally, Purdue University has the online writing lab, often referred to as the Purdue OWL. And that has, it's another sort of terrific resource that has, AP style guides, kind of talking about this use of passive voice, grammar, how to structure your reports and your writing. And it's another very, very great resource that you can bookmark. And with that, does anyone have any questions? I'm obviously going to be hanging out in the Slack for the rest of this wonderful conference. So feel free to bombard me with all of your questions on there. And that's all I have for you today.